Hey
everyone, welcome to Hookah Time with Mind Row. Today we're going to be talking about the Anhk, the power of melanin, how the racial war we're having right now currently has blinded us from the concept of melanin and what it means to really be Kemetic. And I have Kepra Patah here as my guest. He's a Kemetic priest. He's going to be helping in this conversation. And we'll just go over the last show really quick. This show is going to be really fast because we're kind of in a hurry right now, so it's probably about only 20 minutes long. So we're going to kind of cram everything in 20 minutes as fast as we can. If you have any questions, you're free to comment or inbox, and we will answer them after the show is over. But the last show we talked about being in touch with our spiritual side. Not sure what our next episode will be about. I'm trying to get into politics. But let's get started. Let's talk about the Anhk. So I noticed a lot of people wearing the Anhk. It seems to be very popular nowadays, but I think it would be wise to know exactly what you're wearing. So the concept of the Anhk does definitely represent balance. It does represent the female energy and the masculine energy, and the child innocent energy, which represents the balance between all concept and energy. And also it also represents the concept. The reason why it means so much to me is because it represents the concept of bringing back the feminine divine energy to bring more balance within our or within this dimension and planet that we're living on, because that's the whole concept why there's so much war here, because there's too much masculine energy. And to be able to fuse that out is to be able to raise the vibration of feminine energy so we could have more balance. Not saying to get rid of all masculine energy, but to create more of a balanced energy amongst this planet right now. So is there anything else you want to comment on the Anhk?
Okay, well, now if you can see, I got my Anhk on, right? This one is blue, and there's a reason why. The reason why it's blue is because that is what the ancestors, or the ancestors, sent to me when I was a child. It is something that I seen in a vision, right? Or actually, I seen it right in front of me, and I had no recollection of what it was in my early childhood. But it's something that I seen, and the best way I could describe it is a vision. So as time went on, I began to see this symbol more and more, you know. In fact, I even saw a version of it in my church that I was going to at the time. They had like a round, more of a round one at the top as opposed to the teardrop, which people will see as, this is called the shin. The top is called the shin, representing spirit. Then you have the Tao, right? The Tao cross also represents stability. And then you have the sacred masculine and feminine. Of course, you see where there's a circular aspect, and then there's what you call the phallic aspect. But then there's also the balance, because it talks about having equilibrium. So, you don't see anything like a bird flying around with one wing, right? It has to have both wings in order to ascend, in order to rise. There's always has to be a balance. And this is where we get into the concept of Ma'at. Now, when we look at the Anhk in the Middle Netter, or the hieroglyphics, it's spelled with a water wave, which is the sound. Also, that water wave represents the electricity and part of this electromagnetic realm in which we live in. You got the placenta underneath, or the sieve. And we know that life is born and is carried in the placenta. It's kind of like the mother within the mother, in which the child eventually born from. And it keeps the child alive inside of the belly of the mother. So you have the Anhk, and it talks about life, but it also deals with the sacred breath. Like, for instance, if you look at some of the pictographs, when they show Hathor or Hetaru, and she's got the Anhk up to the lips of the king or to the deceased, because what she's doing is she's making them to be able to breathe and speak again. So in order to utilize the sacred breath, you have to breathe in a certain way. And we could get into all that later. But one of the things that we have forgotten how to do is breathe. So when people look at me wearing the Anhk and they ask, well, what religion are you? What's your religion? What is your belief? And I'm going to do what my elder has taught me. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Breathe out. You see, you just joined my religion. Okay? So it's simple as that. The Anhk represents the life principle, which is within all things. There's always a balance in this realm of the sacred feminine as well as the sacred masculine. They have to have a balance. And if you look at the symbol of Ma'at, in which a lot of people are looking into and researching these days. What we see is we see a woman and she is on her knees with her arms extended and she has the feather of Ma'at, which is an ostrich feather in her hair. And what does that represent? That represents truth. So Ma'at, she represents truth. She's balanced, she's harmony, and she is the way. But why is she kneeling? Because it represents the ability to ground yourself, right? Also the ability to take off. Because in order to ascend, you have to ground. How do you ground yourself? You ground yourself in living in harmony with the law. What is the law? Is it a set of commandments written by people? Basically claiming that I got them from God. Not exactly. Now there are the 42 declarations of Ma'at, but that is a ritual. We call that the declarations of innocence. And it is believed that if you live in harmony with those 42 declarations, which are actually different for different, the different people. Like for instance, there's Anhk, and then there's also another papyrus, and I can't think of his name right now, but he had a different set. Sometimes there's 77 rules, right? And what you're saying is that you're denying that you have done those wrongs. Why? Because it is shame and guilt which creates a heavy heart. When you have a heavy heart, it will not balance with the feather of Ma'at. With a heavy heart, you cannot obtain what is called immortality. In order to obtain immortality, you have to have a light heart. So you have to remove the impurities within your heart that's causing your heart to outweigh the feather. They have to have balance and equilibrium. So this gets into the whole reason why offerings are made to the deities and everything else, because it's dealing with an exchange.
So since we're getting to being eternal and whatnot, and immortal, I'm going to move on to the next subject really quick. We're trying to cram everything in really fast. Let's talk about melanin. There's a major racial war going on right now, and it's probably going to get worse as time goes by, with the presidency and everything going on in the government, all over the news and whatnot. So I want to touch base on the concept of melanin and why a lot of people talk about how melanin is power. The concept of melanin it came from the concept that everything was created first from darkness, and everything is connected through it, which is made of melanin. Therefore, the more melanin you have, the more ability you have to be able to connect to that divine web, which is connecting everything. And that's where the true concept of the power of melanin came from. We got stuck in this racial war where it's all about black, white, let's defend this, let's defend that, and it's completely blinding people to actually tap into that power of having melanin in the first place, because everyone's too busy defending themselves, which is great, because we need to start there, but we also need to learn how to ascend past that, see that, and also understand why was that melanin power hidden from us in the first place, and then find out why, and then tap into that melanin power. The concept is to be able to tap into the divine web and to be able to have mediumship and be able to open your third eye, and that's where a lot of the melanin power comes from. So I hope a lot of you don't, I'm trying to, really wish the best for all of you to not get too caught up in the racial war and get caught up in fighting about black and white and whatnot, because it's keeping you from really going home and meditating and really concentrating on that inner power, that spiritual power, and what it really comes from. If you're too busy fighting all the time, you're victimizing yourself. And he has made this statement as well: you cannot be a god or a goddess and be a victim at the same time. It makes no sense. You got to pick which one you are. Therefore, if you want to claim to have melanin power, then let's do something with it. Let's tap into the great divine. Let's start meditating. Let's start tapping into our spiritual powers and whatnot, because that's really why they suppressed us. And if you know that, then let's tap into it and let's start working with it and stop talking about it. Let's start being about it. That's how I feel, and that's what I believe.
Well, Ro, bringing up the concept of melanin, that's very important. I think it's something we need to look into, especially in concerning the ways of the ancestors. And I've been studying the Melanin for quite a while. At least I've been going over it and looking into it, studying it for over 20 years, right? The Kemetic tradition, or at least in the Kemetic wisdom, what I've learned is that Kemet, right? If you look at the hieroglyphics that make up that word, Kemet, you have a piece of charcoal, you have an owl, and then you have the T, which is the loaf of bread, which is also shaped like a breast because of the symbolism of nourishment behind that. That makes the word Kemet. It also contains the word Kem. Now, Kem is a word that means black, but it also represents, you look at the charcoal, it represents the carbon. All life is carbon based. The ancient Kemetians also saw themselves as beings who came from out of the land, autochthonous, if I'm pronouncing that right, or autochthones, because they had come and they sprung from the land itself. Well, the color of the land, when it reached a certain time of the season, you have the soot that basically was washed down, the river, and it would basically fertilize the soil, make the soil fertile so that the crops could grow. So they saw themselves as being people who emerged from out of the soil, out of that area. And they were called the Kemetians, or we call them the Kemetians today. They're also known as the Kamau. And another more generic name for the people were the Remech. You get the word rem. Rem is a word for tears. So in other words, they've seen people themselves as being the tears of the sun itself, the tears of Ra. And they were called the Remech. So I say all that to say this. When you look at chem and you look at the fact that all life is carbon based, and metaphorically we learn that you get a diamond from smashing and putting pressure on charcoal and coal. It represents the self developing from one state of being to a higher level of being. But we have to go to the pressure, and that awakens that God consciousness within us. So you look at the whole story of Asar. There's Asar who is betrayed by his brother, chopped up into 14 pieces. Eventually he's resurrected. Eventually he loses his penis, but later it's replaced with a golden one. All that symbolizes how the original people were broken up into pieces and scattered, right? And eventually they'll come back together. But it talks about the catfish swallowing the penis, which represent the compromised masculinity in which we see today. We think is being like, what we see as a patriarchy is actually masculinity that has been thrown out of balance, right? So you see, like they talk about how the man is, for some reason, he has lost his manhood. A man who is actually in touch with himself is more calm and collective, not someone with a flaring, crazy out of control ego and all that, and a super aggressive and stuff. Now there is a certain amount of, he got to be a go-getter, all right, because he was a hunter and he had to protect the women and the children, but he had to have developed something within him. And this is what the path of initiation implied, because he has to overcome his fears. So in order to become a priest in ancient Kemet, you had to go to like 40 years of training, and you had to overcome every fear according to that culture, which was known to man. But not everybody became a priest. Not everybody in Kemet walked around wearing Ankhs either. But it was for a lot of people who were in the higher echelons of society. They had different professions. Not everybody was a writer. There were some people who farmed. There were some people who were farmers, and Kemet was an agricultural civilization. So when we look at the whole concept of melanin, it talks about us cultivating the God within ourselves. So when you look in the Perdim Heru and Ger, also known as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, you're coming to a part where it says Nuk ba Nater, a Nuk ba Inter, which means my soul is divine. You see, so we're looking at the divinity within ourselves. And when it comes to the sacred masculine and as well as the divine feminine, you're looking at each other and seeing the God, and God is within each other, right? When I look at you, I see the God is within you. You look at me, you see the God. And that's basically how we pay homage to each other. We pay homage to the spirit behind things. It's not the appearance so much as it's the spirit that holds everything together. This goes into the idea of deity worship. Now, we've been accused of worshiping many gods and goddesses, right? The ancestors understood this. Everything in nature has a spirit. So what they did is that they came up with representations of that particular spirit, right? Notice how all your great civilizations of the ancient time was by water. In ancient Kemet, the Nile Valley, the Nile River, it served a specific purpose because it was seen as that part of the land that brought wealth as well as nourished and fed the people. You go out to Africa and all over the world, and you're going to discover that there are sacred rivers. Why? And the deities around these rivers always represent wealth. They would leave food offerings and everything else to these deities, because it is the river that represented how the economy, actually it was the economy, the river connected people to the whole economy of bringing import and export. So what happened is that at one point in time, you would pay homage to Aset. She became Mary, where you get the word marine. Now you got maritime law. Mary in ancient Kemet means beloved. They called Kemet Ta Meri, the beloved land, or the land that was cultivated. It was the cultivated land. This is where we talk about the feminine energy representing wealth. If you go to West Africa today, you're going to discover that the feminine energy represents wealth, not in the form of that which is exploited, but that which brings fortune and abundance into the lives of the people.
All right, since we are talking about land, let's get into the real concept of really being Kemetic, and how a lot of it turned kind of into a fad and a fashion show. And I want to hope everybody kind of gets away from that, because we don't want to have this culture being lost and being washed out and whatnot, like a lot of culture has been. So let's kind of keep it flowing with the popularity, but I'm really hoping that doesn't go the wrong way. So let's talk about the real concept of being Kemetic. To me, I believe that real concept of being Kemetic is really about knowing thyself, and to get to know thyself. And it's a lifestyle. It's definitely not a fashion show, which it seemed to have turned into. And it's also tied into the whole racial war concept, because it was created to keep us from the real meaning of being Kemetic. So the real meaning of being Kemetic is really being in touch with our spiritual power, because to know thyself is going beyond the flesh, and thyself is thy spirit. So when you go beyond all these conditions that we have been conditioned from schooling, conditioned through the government and the society and whatnot, to know thyself is to be able to peel those layers off and to see what's really spiritually going on within. And that's how we get back also to that spiritual power that we have. And the more you know thyself, the more powerful you really become. And I believe being Kemetic is really a lifestyle, really meditating and really focusing on these gods that are represented by animals and whatnot, and knowing why we meditate on those gods and goddesses, and which ones we should be meditating on at certain times for ourselves. That's what really it means to be Kemetic. And you want to go on a little bit more about that?
Oh man, you had the mic for a minute. Okay, I was like, oh shoot, maybe I might not have to say too much. Got this. Okay, so I agree, right? Now here's the thing, and I want people to take this in consideration. One of the reasons why, there's so much focus on reclamation is because for years, Egyptology, because they have been utilizing, this field for a whole lot of things as they learn about the secrets of the ancestors and keep that knowledge to themselves. And at the same time, they act as though the originators of that knowledge have no connection with it today.
They also want to lie about it and demonize it and own it and whatnot.
Yes, because if you knew what made the Nile Valley civilization great and you tapped into it, they will no longer be able to make a slave out of you. You see what I mean? But they can keep you under the thumb of these various religions that are telling you, oh, well, you got to be a slave. There's no divinity within you. Everything is outside of you. The priesthood understood, and the ancient Kemetians who were awakened and conscious, they understood that as above, so below, as within, so without. So everything you're doing within yourself is having an effect on your environment. Everything you do in your environment is having an effect within yourself. If you dirty your environment up, then you're going to be dirty on the inside, number one. Number two, I call on Ra. I call on Sebek. I call on Amun. I call on Aset. I call on Heteru. Anecharak Amun Ra. Anecharak Sekmet. Anecharak Ptah. Anecharak Taset. Anecharak Geb. Anecharak Shu. Anecharak Tefnut. Anecharak Nebu Tuwa Untr. All praise be to the divine. But you see, when you get into Egyptology, all they're going to show you is a bunch of freaking funerary texts and lie to you and tell you that they were people who were fascinated with death only. They were all about life. You see the contradiction in that, because you see, the Anhk was about life. So I'm a person who pays homage to and respects life. But when the Vatican went and stole all that knowledge and put all that information in the Vatican, all they left behind mostly was funerary texts. So a lot of people walking around with the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is a funerary text, right? And they're quoting from it like it's the Bible, but it's actually a book of rituals. Now, you can utilize it if you wish, okay? I say study it, but also study everything around you, because the Netaru are divine principles that function in nature, and humans are also a force of nature. We're not separated from that. So if you want to awaken the Neter or the Asar within yourself and activate that melanin, which we call Kim-Ur or Asar Neferkam, which is Asar, the beautiful black. When you want to activate that within yourself, you pay homage to the spirit within all things, because you're not separate from that. We're separate because we got these skin jackets, as you refer to them, right? Mm-hmm. But that allows us to have our individuality, and each being expressions of the divine in our own right. Everybody born have their own destiny, and this is what the priesthood learned or was teaching people when they would go and get their readings or having oracle readings. Let's say in the temple of Dendera, that was the temple of Hathor or Hetaru, and they'll go before the astrologer priest who would read their lives and say, well, this is what you have going on, and these are the things you need to avoid. That is still alive in African traditions today. Some still deal with the ancient astrology of that time period, and they also deal with divination. So they would read you and tell you what your life was supposed to be about and things that you're supposed to avoid. Because you see, you can come up, but you can actually build your ladder on the wrong house. You can be a successful McDonald's manager. That's not, doesn't mean that you was meant to be that, though. You see what I mean? So the whole idea of the priesthood in Kemet was to also help to maintain balance in a civilization. This is why they paid homage to all these forces of nature. You see, because let's say if you're not paying homage to Hapi, right, and it now gets all dirty and nasty, then that means that you have cut off the food supply, or the water's too polluted, right, for people to get the healing that they normally would have got if they would have raised the vibration of the water by paying homage to it. So they leave the offerings there. A lot of people look into Kemet, they might get into Aleister Crowley's magic or whatever, and I'm not criticizing them. What I will say is that the African way, which in that tradition was indigenous to Africa, the African way was always to pay homage to the ancestors, because that is the secret of you having access to your power. Mm-hmm. All that melanin we're talking about, that's connected and is intertwined with the ancestors, which is within you. So when you're working with these rituals and you're calling on your ancestors, you're activating your melanin. They call that fractals. As above, so below, as within, so without. Here's something else that needs to be taken in consideration. The reason why a lot of people are stuck in patterns and they cannot break out, if they study their family history long enough, they're going to discover that their great-grandma, all the way down to their mom, and great-great-grandparents had these same issues. Why? Because you have an ancestral problem that you have to deal with. Because you see, everything in this universe deals with fractals, which we call self-similar parts. So we could say this is a holographic universe. Within every part of it contains the whole. Every part of it contains a holographic aspect of the whole thing. You see what I mean? That's how they'll be able to like clone and all that stuff, because they know that. So when you're looking at this concept of Ma'at, and basically how do you practice the Kemetic tradition, they observe nature. Look at the word for their gods are called Neter. Mm-hmm. Remove the vowels from Neter and remove the vowels from nature, and you have the same word. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's history behind that, because around the time of the Roman occupation, right, they spoke Latin. A lot of Egyptian words, right, were brought into both the Greek and the Roman language. And some of those words still survive with us today. Only difference is that they put the vowels in them so they sound a little bit different. One of those examples is netter, which has became nature, which you also find the word nurture. You see what I mean? Yeah. So when you connect with the forces of nature, like for instance, if you look around my place, you're going to discover that I have jars with herbs, right? At times I have jars with water, sometimes jars with dirt, because I'm collecting dirt from these different places, like dirt from a hospital because I want to do a healing ritual, or dirt from a cemetery because I want to connect with my ancestors. You see what I mean? It still has the energy from those particular locations, as well as the hologram of the intent. Everything that's ever been done is still recorded. Nothing dies. Everything just transforms. There is no such thing as death. That's an illusion. You cannot give to the all, and you cannot take away from the all. And the all is constantly creating universes mentally.
Yeah,
That's
it's
why.
going from one form to the next, kind of like from water to ice to steam.
Exactly. Exactly. So everything around you, excluding ourselves, it all began with a thought.
Does anybody have any questions before we sign out? Because we're about to sign off really quick. Does anybody have really any last questions? I see there's a few people watching. Let us know really quick. But before we close out, do you have any last words or anything before we get out of here?
So for those who are interested in like Kemetic classes and study groups, I'm available. You can reach me on Facebook, Kapra Pata, Khepra.
Yeah, he's tagged on the video, guys.
All right, all right. So yeah, so those who would like to talk about it more, hit me up. All right. So I say Uncle Jasaneb Hatep.
All right, peace, everyone.